"Are you serious?" one of the engineers shouted, his voice echoing through the hangar like thunder. "This is a billion-dollar jet, not some broken bicycle on the side of the street. Who let her in here? She doesn't even belong in this room." The others burst into laughter, their voices dripping with mockery. Another chimed in, shaking his head. "Girl, you've got dirt under your nails and rags on your back. What makes you think you can fix what the world's best couldn't?" Olivia's chest heaved, but her eyes burned with fire as she stepped closer to the engine, her voice slicing through their laughter. "You've underestimated me enough," she declared, steady and unshaken. "Why don't you wait and see what I can do?" Hello, family! Before we dive into this unbelievable story, kindly hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We want to see how far this story travels. Because what you're about to witness, it's bigger than humiliation, bigger than discrimination. It's the shocking moment when the tables finally turned. The sun had barely risen over the sleepy American town, its first light spilling across empty streets where silence lingered longer than it should. Olivia, her clothes torn and stained from days of wandering, shuffled along the cracked pavement with weary steps. She was a young black woman, barely in her 20s, and yet her face carried lines of struggle far older. Each morning she walked with no destination, no home to claim, no hand to hold. The stares of passers-by followed her, some with pity, most with contempt. To them she was invisible until she came too close. Then she was a problem to avoid. That morning, as she dragged her thin jacket tighter against the crisp air, Olivia paused. She had stopped near the gates of a large, gleaming facility, where a private jet rested proudly inside a vast hangar. Two men in dark suits stood outside the gate, speaking in urgent tones. Their voices were sharp, filled with panic. "She's grounded again," one of them muttered, pulling at his tie. "3 teams have tried, and not one of them can fix it. The boss is furious. He was supposed to leave yesterday." The other shook his head, his words thick with frustration. "Do you know how much this delay is costing? Millions, every hour. And every damn expert in this state has already failed." Olivia froze, her ears straining. Something in their words tugged at the corner of her memory. A memory buried under years of hunger. Nights spent reading scraps of manuals she had scavenged from dumpsters outside engineering workshops. Nights whispering equations to herself under bridges. She had always been fascinated by machines, engines in particular, the way each piece fit together like parts of a living body. Before she knew it, her voice cracked through the morning air. "If you permit, I can fix it." The men turned sharply, their eyes narrowing as they caught sight of her. They took in her unwashed face, her hair matted from the street, her shoes split at the seams. One of them laughed outright, the sound cold and dismissive. "You? Fix a jet engine?" he sneered, his lips curling as if the thought itself was an insult. "Girl, you look like you can barely fix your own life." The second man smirked and added with cruel emphasis, "Move along, sweetheart. This isn't a soup kitchen. This is billion-dollar machinery. People who actually belong here have already failed. You don't." Their words cut deep, slicing into wounds she had carried for years. But Olivia stood her ground, clutching the strap of her worn bag as if it could anchor her to the earth. For a moment, she wanted to shrink back into the shadows where the world always shoved her. Something inside refused to bend this time. She lifted her chin. "I know engines. I know how they breathe, how they fail, and how they rise again. All I ask is a chance." The men exchanged a glance, then burst into laughter so loud it echoed down the empty street. One of them waved his hand dismissively, muttering, "This country never runs out of jokes." They pushed past her, their polished shoes clicking against the pavement, leaving her behind like a stain on the sidewalk. But Olivia did not move. Her heart pounded, her fists clenched, and as she stared at the jet gleaming inside the hangar, something stronger than hunger burned within her. She knew she was not wrong. And she knew this was the moment the world would either break her once and for all or finally hear the voice it had long tried to silence. The hangar loomed like a giant cage of steel and glass, its tall doors yawning open to reveal the crippled jet at its center. Olivia's bare feet ached as she crossed the wide concrete floor, each step echoing louder than her courage. Mechanics in blue coveralls swarmed around the plane, their faces set in frustration, their hands greasy from failed attempts. Executives in crisp suits hovered nearby, their expressions sharp with impatience. The billionaire's prized aircraft, sleek, white, and glistening even in its broken state, sat powerless, a monument to failure. The moment Olivia stepped inside, heads turned. The mechanics paused, their chatter cutting short. An uneasy silence spread through the cavernous hangar. Then came the first low chuckle, cruel and dismissive. One man leaned on his wrench and sneered. "Looks like someone wandered away from the shelter. Lost, sweetheart?" His words sparked laughter among the others, a sound that stung her ears like shards of glass. An executive, tall and stiff, adjusted his cufflinks and gave her a once-over. His lips curled in disdain. "Who let this girl in here?" His voice carried, making sure everyone heard the insult. "We're running a billion-dollar operation, not a charity parade." Olivia swallowed hard, her throat burning. She wanted to speak, but the weight of their stares pressed her down, stripping her of dignity. Another mechanic tossed a rag at her feet, smirking. "Go on, wipe the floor for us. That's about the only fixing you're good for." The rag slid across the concrete and stopped against her worn shoes, greasy and filthy, as if to remind her of where they thought she belonged. She bent down, not to pick it up, but to steady herself. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the fury clawing inside her chest. For years she had endured whispers on sidewalks, rejection from interviews, doors slammed in her face simply because her skin was black and her clothes spoke of hunger. She had been told she wasn't good enough, smart enough, worthy enough. Yet none of those voices knew the countless nights she spent beneath flickering streetlights, reading torn pages of engineering manuals, sketching engines into the dirt like a child drawing stars. "Hey!" Another voice rang out, sharper than the rest. A supervisor stepped forward, his expression hardened with disbelief. "Do you have any idea where you are? This is a restricted area. You're trespassing." His words echoed, filling the hangar with finality. The crowd of mechanics and executives seemed to lean closer, hungry for her shame. Olivia's pulse thundered in her ears. Every instinct told her to run, to slip back into the shadows of the street where no one cared enough to notice her. But her gaze fixed on the massive engine of the jet, its panels pried open like broken ribs. She saw what the others had missed, a subtle alignment, a breathing flaw in the core. It was as if the machine whispered to her, calling her forward. She straightened, her voice steady despite the fire in her chest. "I didn't come here to beg. I came here to fix what no one else can." The laughter returned, louder now, bouncing against the hangar walls. One mechanic slapped his thigh, doubling over in amusement. Another shook his head, muttering, "Unbelievable! A homeless black girl thinks she knows more than trained engineers." The executive's face twisted with mockery. "Sweetheart, you don't belong here. Not in this company. Not in this world. Now leave before security drags you out." The words sliced deep, but Olivia did not move. For the first time in years, she stood rooted, her hands clenched at her sides, her chest rising with determination. Their insults did not erase what she knew. The machine needed her, and though they tried to bury her beneath humiliation, she felt something powerful stirring, a refusal to be silenced. The hangar waited, buzzing with cruel laughter and disbelief. Olivia lifted her chin, her voice trembling yet unbroken. "If you permit me, I will fix it." The hangar fell silent, as though her words had stolen the very air from the room. Every pair of eyes locked on Olivia, the ragged black girl whose voice cut through their laughter with a force none expected. For a moment, disbelief held them. Then, almost on cue, a wave of scoffs rippled through the crowd. A mechanic dropped his wrench, the clang ringing out like a gavel. "Fix it?" he barked, shaking his head. "Girl, you're out of your damn mind." But Olivia didn't flinch. Her chest rose and fell as though every breath carried the weight of her entire life. She could feel their eyes scraping against her skin, their smirks daring her to shrink back. Instead, she stepped forward, closer to the crippled jet, her voice steady, alive with fire. "If you permit me, I will fix it." The words hung there, daring anyone to challenge them. The supervisor crossed his arms, his jaw tightening. "This isn't a playground," he snapped. "We're not here for circus tricks." Yet something in her tone made even him hesitate, just for a flicker of a second. The executive sneered, exchanging looks of mock amusement. One leaned in toward the other and whispered loud enough for her to hear, "She probably doesn't even know which side of the engine opens." Their laughter was sharp, rehearsed, meant to cut. Olivia's fists clenched until her nails dug into her palms, but she forced herself to breathe. She wasn't fighting them. She was fighting every memory of being told she was nothing. She stared at the jet, its open panels gleaming beneath the harsh lights, and in her mind the pieces moved like notes on a sheet of music. She could see where the rhythm had faltered, where the balance had broken. "Give her the damn chance," one mechanic muttered sarcastically, leaning against the toolbox. "It'll be entertaining at least." A chorus of agreement followed, cruel laughter spilling across the hangar. The supervisor smirked, tilting his head as if humoring a child. "Fine. Touch it. Let's see how long it takes before you embarrass yourself." His voice dripped with disdain, but Olivia caught the trace of unease buried beneath it. Her feet carried her forward, slow but unshaken. The jet loomed larger with every step, the scent of fuel and steel filling her lungs. As she reached the open engine, the whispers behind her sharpened into insults. "Don't mess up your pretty hair now," one mechanic jeered. "Careful, sweetheart. This machine costs more than your life." She ignored them. Her hands brushed the metal, warm under the hangar lights. Closing her eyes for a moment, she let the silence of the machine speak louder than the noise behind her. Years of scavenging manuals, studying diagrams by dim candlelight, and sketching parts into dirt roads rushed back to her. It wasn't luck that had brought her here. It was knowledge carved into her bones by hunger and resilience. When she opened her eyes again, something had shifted. Determination blazed there, undeniable, unshakable. She reached into her worn bag, pulling out a small bundle of tools she had carried for years, salvaged and sharpened like relics of her survival. Gasps and chuckles spread behind her, but she no longer heard them. With every twist of her wrist, with every bolt she touched, the hangar's energy changed. The mocking laughter grew quieter, replaced by whispers, then silence. The executives leaned closer, their eyes narrowing as confusion replaced mockery. Even the mechanics, arms crossed in smug defiance, began to shift uneasily as the girl who was supposed to fail moved with precision they hadn't seen before. Olivia's voice cut through the quiet, low and certain. "Engines are like people. They break when they're misunderstood." She turned a bolt with a firm snap, her eyes never leaving the engine. "But if you listen closely, they'll tell you how to heal them." The roar of laughter had died completely. In its place, the hangar now hummed with tension, every breath caught between doubt and the first fragile spark of belief. All eyes were on her, the girl they had mocked, the girl they had dismissed. And for the first time, they began to wonder if she just might do the impossible. The night stretched long inside the hangar, the floodlights casting harsh white beams over the silent crowd that had gathered to witness what they were certain would end in failure. Olivia's hands moved with a rhythm born not of training in fancy schools but of survival, of nights hunched over scraps of manuals, of hours spent taking apart broken radios just to understand how wires spoke to each other. Her tools, old and mismatched, glinted as if they had been waiting all these years for this very moment. Sweat trickled down her temples, stinging her eyes, but she did not stop. She crawled beneath the belly of the jet, her thin frame disappearing into shadows where the most delicate pieces waited. The mechanics had folded their arms, smirking at first, but now their faces betrayed unease. She worked with a certainty they hadn't expected, her hands moving over the engine as though she were stitching a wound, every twist of a bolt, Every adjustment of a line, every careful tug on a wire spoke louder than any insult thrown at her. The supervisors muttered among themselves, voices dropping lower the longer she worked. The executives shifted uncomfortably, the mockery draining from their eyes as the minutes dragged into hours. The girl who had been ridiculed as worthless was commanding the silence of the entire hangar. Olivia whispered to herself as she worked, her words more prayer than calculation. "Engines are alive. You just have to hear their cry." She pressed her ear close to the metal, listening for the faint vibrations others had ignored. She tapped a panel, tightened it, then rechecked the balance, her motions precise, deliberate, fueled by a fire that had nothing to do with recognition and everything to do with proving she was never what they thought. When one of the mechanics tried to snicker, his voice cracked in the heavy silence. No one joined him. Even they could see what was happening. The pieces falling into place, the puzzle realigning under hands they had sworn would fail. The hangar that had once buzzed with derision now vibrated with something else, anticipation. Hours passed, but Olivia did not falter. The ragged girl, hungry and homeless, became something unrecognizable before their eyes. Her back straightened, her movements sharpened, her presence grew until she was no longer just a girl in rags. She was a force rewriting everything they believed about who deserved to be here. Finally, she stepped back, her chest heaving, her hands blackened with grease, her face shining with sweat and determination. The massive engine loomed silent before her, waiting. She wiped her brow with the back of her hand and looked toward the stunned mechanics. Her voice rang out, steady, unyielding. "Power it up." No one moved at first. The supervisor hesitated, torn between the fear of humiliation and the impossible spark of belief burning in his chest. Then, almost reluctantly, he gave the nod. The technician turned the key. The engine groaned, coughed, then roared. At first it sputtered, like a wounded beast gasping for life. But Olivia didn't flinch. "Again," she commanded, her voice cutting through the air like steel. They tried once more, and this time the engine screamed alive, a thunderous roar shaking the hangar walls, filling every corner with the undeniable sound of victory. The crowd staggered back, their faces bathed in the glow of the running jet. Some covered their ears, others just stared in stunned silence. Olivia stood firm, her small frame silhouetted against the blazing machine she had brought back to life. The same mouths that had spat insults now hung open, speechless. She had done what their wealth, their education, their arrogance had failed to do. The homeless black girl, the one they had mocked, had awakened the sleeping beast of steel. And in that moment, the roar of the engine became her voice, louder than their laughter, stronger than their hate, undeniable in its triumph. The roar of the engine shook the very bones of the hangar, a thunderous sound that silenced every voice, every doubt, every cruel laugh that had been thrown at her. Olivia stood before it, her chest rising and falling, her hands still trembling from the work, her face streaked with sweat and grease. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the jet breathing again, alive under the command of a girl they had tried to erase. Then came footsteps, measured, deliberate, echoing across the hangar floor. Heads turned sharply as the billionaire himself entered, flanked by security and senior executives. His presence shifted the air. Tall, commanding, dressed in a suit that seemed untouched by dust or time, he scanned the room with sharp eyes that carried the weight of power. He had been told of failure after failure, of millions slipping away with every wasted hour. Now he arrived to see his prized jet trembling with life. "What is this?" His voice boomed, cutting through the stunned silence. The supervisor stepped forward, his throat dry, words stuttering as he tried to explain. But before he could twist the story into his own, one of the mechanics spoke up, unable to hold back. "Sir, it was her." His hand trembled as he pointed toward Olivia. The billionaire's eyes fell on her, and for a moment, his brows knit together in disbelief. A homeless black girl in rags stood before him, not one of his polished engineers, not a man with titles stitched into his resume. Her. The executives shifted nervously, their earlier mockeries still etched in the air. They braced themselves for his anger, for the humiliation of being exposed. Olivia's chin lifted, though her knees felt weak beneath her. She met his gaze, steady, unafraid. "If you permit," she said softly, her voice carrying across the stunned crowd, "I will keep it flying." The billionaire approached, his shoes clicking against the concrete. He stopped before her, so close she could smell the cologne clinging to his suit, so close she could see his expression waver between disbelief and respect. He turned slightly, his eyes sweeping over his team, the experts who had mocked her, the men who had failed him. "You all told me it couldn't be done," he said coldly. "And yet she—" He looked back at Olivia, his voice lowering into something almost reverent. "She did it." The silence that followed was its own kind of reckoning. The mechanics dropped their eyes, shame burning their faces. The executives shifted uncomfortably, their pride dissolving in the weight of truth. Every insult, every laugh, every word of humiliation they had hurled at her now clung to them like chains. Olivia stood taller, her frame still fragile but her spirit blazing. For the first time, the laughter was gone, not because she had silenced it with anger, but because she had proven beyond question that their prejudice had blinded them. The engine behind her roared again, as if to punctuate the justice of the moment, as if the machine itself testified to her brilliance. The billionaire extended his hand. "You saved me millions," he said, his voice carrying across the hangar. "But more than that, you reminded me that genius doesn't wear a uniform. It doesn't live in wealth. It can rise from anywhere, even the street." Olivia looked at his hand for a long moment, then placed her own into it. Her palm was rough, scarred from years of survival, but it was steady. Gasps rippled through the crowd as they watched, knowing they had witnessed something greater than a jet fixed. It was power reversed, justice delivered, truth unveiled. For Olivia, the sound of the engine was more than victory. It was a roar against every moment she had been silenced, a roar against every insult, a roar declaring that her life, her mind, her worth could no longer be denied. She was no longer just a homeless black girl. She was the one who had done the impossible. And the world would never again forget her name. Olivia wiped the grease from her hands, her eyes sweeping over the silent crowd. Those who had laughed at her could no longer look her in the face. She raised her voice, strong and unshaken, every word hitting like thunder. "You called me worthless. You told me I didn't belong. But today, I proved you wrong. Never again will you underestimate me." The engine thundered behind her, alive and roaring like her triumph, a sound so loud it buried every insult ever thrown her way. If this story shook you the way it shook me, hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We want to see how far this victory spreads. Because this isn't just a story about a jet engine, it's about courage, resilience, and the unstoppable power of a voice the world tried to silence. Don't scroll past. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today.